center as O. We draw a line through the center like this. How many parts is the page divided into? Yes, 2 parts. So the line divides the page into 2 parts. Now let's draw another line on the piece of paper. It passes through the center and it's perpendicular to this line. How many parts is the page getting divided into now? Yes, 4 parts. So the 2 lines divide this page into 4 parts. Now imagine the paper to be the XY plane and these lines to be the X and the Y axis. So the X and the Y axis divide the XY plane into 4 parts. I'm sure you've come across a mathematical term for these 4 parts. And what are they called? Yes, they're called quadrants. So we can say that the XY axis divide the XY plane into 4 quadrants. Each quadrant is 1/4 of the XY plane. Now imagine drawing another axis through point O. It's vertical and it's also perpendicular to the X and the Y axis. It's the Z axis. So we have the XY plane and the X, Y and Z axis with us. As you can see, the Z axis takes us from the second dimension to the third dimension. We know that the X and the Y axis divide the XY plane into 4 parts. How many parts do the X, Y and the Z axis divide our 3-dimensional space into? Let's find out using a simple example. As this is a 3-dimensional figure, let's use cubes to represent the parts. There are 4 parts above the XY plane. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 and Part 4. And similarly, there are 4 parts below the XY plane. Part 5, Part 6, Part 7 and Part 8. The X, Y and the Z axis divide 3-dimensional space into 8 parts. 4 parts above the XY plane and 4 parts under it. This looks like a Rubik's Cube with 8 cubes. 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom. Each small cube in the Rubik's Cube is 1/8 of the whole cube. Or we can say that it's 1 out of the 8 parts of the Rubik's Cube. Just like the axes divide the Rubik's Cube into 8 parts, we can say that the X, Y and the Z axis divide 3-dimensional space into 8 parts. Again, there is a mathematical term for these 8 parts. Can you guess what the term might be? Yes, they are called octants. Each octant is 1/8 of the 3-dimensional space. So what is the conclusion from this lesson? Our conclusion is that the XY axis divide the XY plane into 4 quadrants, while the X, Y, Z axis divide the 3-dimensional space into 8 octants.